So, welcome everybody. This is, apart from Russell's keynote, I guess the last talk on the conference, right? So, this is a new talk. We've only done it once. And doing talks with two persons seems to be additionally hard. So we're trying, and what we've been trying is, so there's a lot of software development methodologies. There has been a lot over the years. And so lots of people have been making money from these software development methodologies. You can pay for all sorts of certifications and stuff like that. And well, we thought that creating a new software development methodology, which sort of combines the worst of all the others. It's a bit similar to what Mark Rendell does with the worst programming language in the world. So we thought we create the worst software development methodology in the world. Although there's heavy competition, I know. We already have things like Waterfall and Scrum and Safe. So it's a hard competition for the worst one, but we'll try. So let's kick off. Let's introduce ourselves first. That may be a good thing to do. My name is Sander. I'm an independent dad. One of my kids is in the back room, at the back of the room. I'm basically a software architect. I'm a programmer and have been since 1984. And I still love doing that. And I speak a bit, I write a bit. I am currently, as an independent consultant, the CTO for a company that builds software for the insurance market. And I used to be the CTO for an insurance company. Before that, I was working for Capgemini and had the official role of Global Agile Thought Leader. So I've seen a lot of failing projects, a lot of failing Agile projects too. So, well, we'll talk about that.
That sort of makes you an expert, right?
An expert on failing projects.
Yes.
That sounds cool, yeah.
Any other experts in the room? Oh yeah, great. Well, then about me, we work at the same company. We previously also worked at the same company, so I'm wondering what we'll be doing next together, right? And there I'm head of IT. So he's mostly about technology and I'm mostly about people. But actually I did start programming since this year. So I'm very proud to do also some technical things. Well, let's just get started, right?
Yeah, well, let's give you a bit of history. So we're going to talk a bit about the history of software development methodologies. And we'll pick on the most famous of all first, called Waterfall. You've all seen this, right? So Waterfall has been around for quite some time now. So does anybody know how old it really is? So 72. English is better than Dutch, I guess. 72. It's older, a bit. Anybody?
You can't Google it.
Google it. Well, I'll tell you what it is. So there is a white paper that was published in 1970 by a guy called Winston Royce, who used to work for Lockheed. And the white paper is called Managing the Development of Large Software Systems. Now, that paper is considered as the origin of Waterfall. And there's a funny thing about this white paper. I'll tell you the story from it. So if you look in the white paper, and you can still find it on the internet, right? It's still there. So one of the pictures in that particular white paper is this picture. This is a picture you all know, right? You've seen this at university, college, or wherever you go to in work. So basically, this is what we try to do in software development projects is that, so there's a bunch of activities that you need to do, some analysis, some design, you need to build some code, you need to test it, you need to talk to users, you need to put it in production and have it managed for the rest of its lifetime, right? We've seen this, right? And now, there's some interesting things about this methodology is that it is considered to have all of these stages only once. That's how we've been doing projects for years and years and years. Now the funny thing is, Winston Royce in 1970, who is considered to be the father of the Waterfall methodology, really isn't. Actually, if you look closely to the white paper written in 1970, that all of the Waterfall methodologies are based on, starting with the United States Department of Defense, the DoD, has a standard called the DoD 2167 and 2167B, that actually adopt this particular model. From that, we have been doing failing projects for like 40 to 50 years. Even the DoD itself did some investigation, and apparently 75% of all the projects they did using this approach failed. Right? And there has been multiple research about it, and all of them show the same results. It fails. So Winston Royce should have been a depressed man. However, in the same white paper, there's a next picture. Now, the next picture clarifies a lot more about his thoughts. This is actually what it looks like. Winston Royce, in 1970, did not say, do the waterfall model. By the way, it is called the waterfall because it sort of drizzles down, right? The only reason that these 7 boxes are not on the same line is because he didn't have an advanced enough text editor to be able to do this in the same line. It didn't fit the page. That's why it's called waterfall. That's the only reason. It is basically a linear process. But he actually says this in the same white paper. This is figure 3. And he says, hopefully the iterative interaction between the various phases is confined to successive steps. He basically says, well, you should always be able to go back. Take a step back into a previous stage, see what's happening, do some additional analysis, design, or whatever you do, and go on. And so, well, hopefully it's confined between successive steps, but maybe you have to go back even further. And if you read the white paper even further, he says, note that it is simply the entire process done in miniature to a time scale that is relatively small in respect to the overall effort. He basically says, work iteratively. He wrote this in 1970. We could have saved so much money in our field just by reading this white paper correctly. And again, nobody did. So then, let's say evolution continued, right? We went through stages where we had from waterfall slowly into more iterative processes like unified process and stuff like that. Has anybody done unified process projects here? Yeah, you have. I know you have. So, and then the iterations got shorter and shorter and shorter until we reached the mid-90s and people started thinking about Agile, right? So, what's the thing about Agile? Well, usually, if you talk about Agile, people sort of mix it up with Scrum. Scrum and Agile are basically not the same thing. Scrum is an Agile approach, but there's lots more. This is the best known, of course, because it has very simple terminology so everybody can understand. Right? And people have been confusing this for Agile. Agile has not much to do with this. You can do Agile without doing Scrum, right? I'm still continuously debating, for instance on LinkedIn, about the role of Scrum Master. I don't particularly like that role, but I'm not going to explain that today. That's a different discussion. But you see, on Agile, what we continuously did is that, so we had these methodologies coming up in the 90s, and then in 2001, people wrote down the Agile Manifesto, and we moved on from there, and then everybody adopted Scrum, because everybody became a certified Scrum Master. At least half of you should be. Probably not. Nobody dares to raise his hand now, of course. And then good for you.
Even one of the guys from our team, he never said that, right?
I don't want anybody to know. Are you? Wow, cool. You too. Our own team is.
Oh wow!
Oh man, where's the world turning?
Let's just get beer somewhere.
But Agile is basically a mindset, right? It has nothing to do with doing sprints or have refinement sessions or do retrospectives. Useful techniques, though. But and I think that with Agile becoming more popular, it went all sorts of different directions. Like people try to use it to maybe change the world. And I have nothing against changing the world, but I'm a programmer. I just want to write code, right? If you look at the amount of sessions this weekend that actually had code in it, how many were there, right? And we're developers, right? I love to talk about social stuff, of course, but I also love to talk about code, which I'm not going to do, by the way, today. I did that yesterday. So what you see is that there's actually people sort of moving away from what Agile became. And I'm basically one of them. I've been doing Agile projects for over 20 years, and I think we got sort of stuck in the same rhythm and using the same metaphors all the time. And Agile was always meant to evolve, right? It was meant to keep your thoughts sharp and keep on learning all the time. Instead, we all have adopted Scrum and we're stuck there. And I think that's basically wrong. So people have been moving away. Like if you look at what Dave Thomas says, he says, well, since the Snowbird meeting where they wrote down the Agile Manifesto, I haven't participated in any Agile events. I haven't affiliated with any alliance whatsoever, by the way. And he said, why? Because I think that any of these things were in the spirit of the Agile Manifesto we produced. Having conferences about agility is not too far removed from having conferences about ballet dancing, probably nice too, and forming an industry group around the 4 values always struck me as creating a trade union for people who breathe, right? And that is a very nice statement. And if you go to Agile conferences, stuff like this happens, right? There's quotes. Actually, I stopped going to Agile conferences a while ago, but so you see things happening there, like people saying, make sure you don't miss the Agile elephant versus the Waterfall elephant in the lobby. What is that, right? During this session, we're going to discuss the happiness index of projects. Basically, I couldn't care less. Add ready for celebration before the done column on your Kanban board. If we would have had cake for every item that we actually moved into production, I would have been a really fat man, right? And Alan Holub, a friend of ours, actually says it in a very wise way. He says, more and more, I'm coming to see the term Agile as both unnecessary and self-defeating. Agile has come to mean do part of Scrum badly and use Jira, right? And he said, basically, let's just drop it. So that's where our new software development methodology comes in, right?
Yeah, so we have some very heavy competition to find something even worse than those methodologies, right? But we're going to try, and I think we can succeed. So why yet another methodology? Because we already have plenty of them, and we're making money on them, right? So we don't need another one. Well, we all know the hype cycle, right? And basically it says there's a point where things get very, very big. Then everybody gets disappointed because somehow it didn't turn out to be a silver bullet. You actually have to learn stuff to do it properly, right? If you want to do Agile properly, you actually have to do something. You can't just adopt Scrum badly. So at some point, we'll just drop down the peak of inflated expectations, and then we will lose a lot of money-making opportunities.
Yes.
So we need another one, which can just start over here, and then can just lift us up to the peak of inflated expectations. We need another methodology to actually have new conferences and stuff like that. So first we need a name, because it will be very heavily marketed, right? So we thought we need something Japanese, because everything is Japanese. We thought about origami, because origami means the art of folding things into shapes. So it somehow sounds like software. And then we're also recognized that software is an art. So that's 2 points in one, right? And we can also use Post-its to do some origami, right? If you Google it, you get very nice pictures. And we need something that ends on crossy. So origami crossy or something. And we thought we need something with delivery or something with continuous D. Well, but that turned out a bit hard. And we also, it didn't fit onto stickers. So we thought it should be shorter. And we thought, okay, let's just go for flow. It's easy. Everybody can memorize it. It gives a lot of opportunities for people outside of the industry to join us.
Yeah.
So we just called it flow.
Yeah, sounds like a good idea. That's how we're going to make money, right? So what are we going to keep? Well, we're going to keep sprints in. You like sprints? I don't. I stopped doing sprints with my teams like 6-7 years ago and moved on from that. The thing is with a sprint is that there's some additional work involved. Like at the start of a sprint or an iteration, for that matter, if you do not do Scrum, you are going to try to estimate the stuff that you're going to do during the sprint, right? Do you ever succeed in that? Do you ever exactly estimate how much time it takes to finish just that amount of work? Have you? I haven't, basically. And as a funny thing, when I was working for Capgemini, I looked at a lot of failing projects. And these are actually the burn down charts for one of these projects. They started every sprint that they had with estimating the amount of work that they planned to do during that sprint. This was a capable team, right? They're just not capable of estimating, because we don't know how to estimate in this field. This is a very young field, right? This is not... Estimating software development is very, very hard because it changes all the time. Also, our experience changes. The people in the team change, right? So that means estimation is really, really hard. So if you look at the amount of work that broke down, at the end of the sprint, they had some work left, right? No, that happens, right? And this is the second burn down from the second sprint, and the third sprint, and the fourth sprint, and the fifth sprint. They started referring to these failing sprints as red sprints. That's why I took up the red sprint anti-pattern. This happens all the time, right? Most of the projects I see out there do this. Why? Well, basically, a sprint has become a mini project, sort of mini waterfall project, that fails every time. You know what happened at this particular project? There's one more, by the way. What happened at this project is that the project manager got really cross at the team, and he said, "How come you don't know how to estimate? You're all stupid." Half of them left, basically, and then they still had 3 sprints left to finish the project. Now, on average, they had completed 100 points, whatever points that would be, like pizza points or whatever. And for the 3 remaining sprints, the project manager had calculated that they needed to do 300 points per sprint. You know what he did? No, he hired additional people, right? And you know, in 1976, a guy called Fred Brooks wrote a brilliant book called The Mythical Man Month. In that book, it says, adding more resources to a late project does what? Make the project even later, right? And so he did. He hired people from across the globe, so it became a distributed project at the same time, and it failed miserably. And in the end, he was fired. It should have been done before, right? So, yes, if we want to have a failing methodology, we should keep sprints in, I think.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely. And we will also need gamification.
Of course.
Because people from outside the industry should actually understand what we're doing, right? So we need to cross the communication barrier. But we also have some problems attracting new developers. So we want to try to get them from elementary school. And then I think gamification will help us because young people are more attracted by games. So that might be helpful. Right? Yeah, I think we can actually attract Willow because she likes games, right? Yeah. And programming, so that's great. But it's also about autonomy because, well, I'm a manager and all the methodologies are saying as a manager you should be a servant leader. You should actually have the autonomy within the team and self-organization, and that's a hard thing because if I really succeed in that job, then I don't have a job anymore, right? Or hardly ever. So I don't really want to give away this autonomy to make sure I have a single point of failure. So I want to have some kind of autonomy. So everybody can actually dress their own working space, and that's where the autonomy stops.
We'll make it mandatory, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is Zappos, and they did this actually. So they said everybody can dress their working space in the way they want. So this is also why I was hesitating about the autonomy, because this is what you get, right? Who wants to work in this space, actually? I mean, you also have to have time to focus, so that's a benefit, right? You can't focus anymore. This is also a picture of how it looks over there. So I think everybody can just have their own things from home and just feel like home and everything. This was actually me at an interview at a technology store in Holland, Coolblue, and I was in this thing for my job interview, which was kind of, well, different.
This is not the IKEA, by the way, right?
No. This is Coolblue. They are like Amazon or something. They sell stuff on the internet.
This was a serious job interview, right?
Yeah, that's cool, right? So this is what we want, definitely. We want mandatory fun, and to make sure that we set clear boundaries, because as I said, we're not giving away any real autonomy, so we need to have clear rules. So everybody has to spend at least 20% of their time doing games. Especially when customers come to our working space, we will go into game modus right away, and we have a bring your own controller rule. So everybody should bring their own controller from home. That's very important to do.
Instead of bring your own device, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, pretty cool. Yeah. So what's next? So we have to talk about teams, right? Now, teams are a difficult thing. So there's lots of things to say about teams. So let's pick on Scrum a bit, right? So in Scrum, whether you read the Scrum guide or the Scrum manual or whatever it's called these days, it sort of says like teams should be 7 plus or minus 2 or 6 plus or minus 3, which is basically the same, right? And so I would say that on average you could do much more with teams, right? If you look at disciplined Agile, which is one of the more advanced Agile methodologies, they have many more roles actually. So I would say that you need as many roles as we can find, most of these agile approaches, especially the enterprise agile approaches, have a lot of roles. So we're going to adopt all of them, which means your team should be at least 35 people. Well, it could be 42, of course, but then again, that would be the right answer. And because talking about all these different roles is way too complicated for people in the teams, because you don't know what role you're going to have anymore, right? You know what we said? Basically, managers call us resources anyway, so we'll only have one role called resource. So from now on, your role, a resource, right? It's basically, it's on my laptop, right? We are people, not resources. So we created resource. That's the only role we're going to have in Flow. It's called resource. So, and basically, also, it's mandatory to have a beard. Right? If you go to Java conferences, everybody has a beard, including the women. And so we'll make that mandatory anyway, right? That's what you do, right? And then we have to talk a little bit about self-organization. Now, self-organization is a very interesting concept, right? I think self-organization of teams is really brilliant. So we should have that. But it's also very hard, right? It's for most people, it's way outside of their comfort zone. I've been trying to get my teams to self-organize for years. Usually, if you go to teams, you say, well, from now on, you're self-organized. And the first thing they'll ask you is, so what do you want us to do? Right? It happens all the time. And basically, I haven't found any recipes to be self-organized. How to do that, how to deal with that. Because basically, it's this challenge, right? You can say people, you have to be self-organized, like how to draw an owl. Well, you draw 2 circles, and after that, you draw the rest of the owl. That's basically how self-organization works in most organizations. So it becomes messy in most organizations. So we'll have self-organization. I love that. So what's next?
DevOps, of course.
Yes. Oh, we shouldn't forget DevOps.
Yeah, certainly. So who's working in a DevOps team at the moment? I mean, this is going to go massive, right? Well, first of all, we were trying to maybe change the words because there's a lot of discussions, a lot of blog posts which are saying we shouldn't have DevOps, we should have Ops Dev. Because Ops Dev means we're front-loading the Ops considerations relating to applications operability, security, skill, etc. Early in the process. So where DevOps was about collaboration of developers and operations, we actually succeeded in making it again a kind of a battle about who has to be first in how we name this kind of collaboration. That's kind of crazy, right? So we should definitely have something like this. So we also see this kind of blog posts where someone said, okay, maybe I'm taking it too literally, just maybe, but maybe what we need is SecDev, SecOps, because security should be at the beginning, and it should also be considered in the middle, and security should definitely also be considered at the end. So we need it everywhere in the verb. This is actually what people are writing on the internet. So I went back to the guy who coined the term DevOps. He's Frank Dubois. And he had to organize a conference, and he was calling it an Agile System Administration Conference. But the name was too long for the flyers. So the marketing guy called him and said, can you come up with something shorter? And he said, yes, sure. And he thought about it, and he thought, well, DevOps, that sounds short, right? That's the way, that's the amount of thought he put into it. There's not some grand plan behind it, like it's dev first and then it's operations or something. It's just a term he thought of and what everybody just copied. So in Flow, we were thinking, okay, we have to have something with community because we see a lot of trend working into integrating everyone within the teams, everyone from business, but also people behind business, right? So community, we think we need some development still. We need operations, obviously. We need some analysts, and we need security because security is going to go massive also in the near future. So that basically says it's come DevOps anal sex. Which is much better, right? But maybe that's a bit long because, again, short words work so much better. And as we were calling them resources, we think we're just going to call the teams REST, which is quite easy again, right?
Yeah.
So, what do you think?
Sounds like a good
Are we ready?
Ready. For what? Oh, meetings. Oh, we shouldn't forget about meetings. We all love meetings, right? I tried to.
Who loves meetings? I'm always the only one, right?
I try to skip as many. The guys on my team know that. I try to skip as many meetings as I can. I try to skip all management team meetings. They want me to be there, but they're too long. About 3 hours, right? Every Tuesday morning. That doesn't make sense to me. But on Agile, we have some nice meetings as well. So we have this thing called stand-ups. So having been doing Agile for at least 20 years now, I've been in so many stand-up meetings that I literally get muscled legs from standing up every day. So currently, on the current company I work for, I have 4 in a row, right? It takes me an hour every morning. The good thing about stand-ups is that eventually they become so boring that, and of course, they take developers from flow, right? So the guys on the team, the guys who are here for my team, they start at 7 in the morning or 7:30, right? I don't know, I still sleep at that point in time. But so when it's 9:30, when we have our stand-up meetings, they have been working for 2 hours already. That means if they would have been in flow already, which they probably are after 2 hours, it breaks the flow, right? And we're going to talk about flow a little bit more about in this sense of the word, right? So it breaks the flow, so that's good. Every time, every meeting you have breaks the flow of what you're doing. So we should have as many meetings as possible. But again, every day it gets too boring, right? So you know what we'll do? In flow, we'll still have stand-up meetings, but once a week and an hour long. Doesn't make sense, right? Usually, you can even have them longer, right? Have them every Tuesday, because then in that case, I won't have to go to the management team meetings, which I don't like anyway. So once a week stand-up meetings sounds fine, right? That's enough progress for us. And then there's the retrospectives. Do you like retrospectives? I don't, because I work with a whole bunch of teams. That means I have a whole bunch of, we actually have them on Monday, right? We have the next retrospective. The good thing is there are only once per month. The also good thing is everybody does demos, right? In the retrospective or the sprint review, whatever you do. And the interesting thing about demos is that people usually spend 1 to 2 days preparing the demos. So having demos is good because that means there's at least one guy on the team who spends 2 days preparing it, not being able to do other work, right? So having demos is a good thing. I think we should have as many demos as possible. We're going to keep them in, but to make sure we don't do any work, we're going to have retrospectives every 2 weeks. Or maybe even every week. That maybe sounds better too. Because basically, we need Lego references, right, all the time.
But we don't forget, we shouldn't follow up on any of the actions.
Right.
Because otherwise, after 2 weeks, we have nothing to talk about.
Oh.
Yeah? So
yes.
It's forbidden to follow up on any of the actions. Make sure you don't actionize them.
Yes. Do people actually do that? Actionize things?
I don't know.
Wow. We just put them in Jira, right?
Yeah.
Makes sense. So the thing with programmers is, if you look at what programmers do, and I've seen this my whole life, it takes about, so there's research being done. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes before a developer gets into flow, right? And you have that every time you go out of flow. So every time, so when I walk into the office in the morning, one of the things I don't do anymore, I don't read my email in the morning. Because when I get into the office, I don't want to see what's in the email because it's going to bother me, right? That means I can immediately open up my IDE, start writing code. But it takes a while before you get into flow, before you start thinking in the right way and start typing. It takes about 10 minutes. So if you can break the flow as many times as possible during the day, that sort of guarantees that your team will slow down a lot, right? So we should do that. That means we should have meetings randomly dispersed over the week. Somewhere during the day, somebody should call a meeting, usually the product owner or a manager, right? Call a meeting, everybody should be there to break flow. Now, it happens all the time, I would say, right?
Yeah, but I think it's not enough.
Not enough?
No, we also need flow in the enterprise.
Oh, yes.
Because in the enterprise, that's where the real money is, and we need that, right? That's basically the question. If you scale up a system, if you scale up your containers, for instance, do you need a more complex architecture? So actually, does a large-scale organization also requires a large-scale process? Or are it just multiple instances of the same thing? does Agile scale at all? Well, people have tried to answer that and came up with very simple graphs like this. This is great, right? Because it already says you're safe. That's nice, I think. So this is basically version 4.0 of SAFe. So they started with just one layer, and every year, literally every year, they just add a layer, which means there's ample of opportunity to just develop yourself as a company and also get some new roles and get on the Agile release train.
Yeah, and also to hire some new consultants, right?
Yes, that's what's the point, right? And well, it didn't stop there. There's also Sociok. I can't even pronounce it. It's terrible. Yeah. I mean, there are 72 patterns you have to learn by heart to actually do this. I mean, I don't know any developers that can memorize 72 things. They would just automate it, right?
Luckily, this is already version 3.0, right?
Yeah. So because it's too hard, what we could also do is maybe we could just look at Spotify.
Yeah, just come to Spotify.
Because Spotify has a very intuitive model. We can actually draw it. It's just this simple drawing. And you have a tribe, you have a squad, you have a guild, you have a chapter. So that's 4 concepts. Spotify was designed this way because at the point where they designed this Agile process, they really thought it up by themselves because they couldn't copy themselves, right? So they actually thought about it, and they said, okay, we're in a rapid growth situation. We're multiplying 8x every year. I mean, that's crazy. My companies never multiply 8x. Maybe that's me. But they actually have one manager for every 1.8 people in Spotify.
Wouldn't you love that?
That's nice, right? Just to be able to cope with that amount of growth. Because you have to hire a lot of people, you have to coach a lot of people, you have to reorganize a lot of times, you have a lot of new regulations, a lot of new stuff. And actually it turns out you need managers to do those things. So one manager for every 1.8 people, that's the model we're all blindly copying. I was speaking at a company the other day. There was this guy who's also at another conference next week, and he said, we're also doing Spotify. And well, they basically said we have 7 layers of management, and we have a tribe lead and a chapter lead and a guild lead and a squad lead. So every person has 11 managers.
Wow.
That's a lot, right? You can't even remember all those names.
It has to be a bank, right?
And there's actually one very clear reason why to not copy Spotify. That's because you're not Spotify, unless you are Spotify. So then you can copy yourself, right? But there's also the alternative, and that's that you can think for yourself. Think of a process that actually suits your company and situation you're in. Well, we're not going to do that because that might actually work, and we want something that doesn't work. Oh, yeah. So we thought of something else. We're going to introduce the Big Flow framework. And we're actually getting a lot of traffic on it because if you look at the hashtag BFF, the younger generation is already picking up on it. Largely, really. Even my daughter actually uses that hashtag already, and she's 13. So what we'll do is we'll add another layer every year. For certain, because then every year we can recertify, we can actually have new consultants joining into large enterprises where the real money is. So that's great. And of course, we're going to have release trains because we can also make nice games from it. And we're also going to have more patterns than sociocracy. And we're going to have more roles than in disciplined Agile. But still all calling them resources, obviously.
Cool.
Yeah.
I want that. Can we buy it now? Oh yeah, we need tooling too, right? So let's first start off with boards. Now, so you're probably all in Agile projects, right? That means you are all using Jira, right? Is anybody not using Jira? Oh, good for you. See, that's only a few, right? That's horrible. So we thought of boards too, and I love boards. I think every team should have at least a Scrum board and a Kanban board. And every team should have at least a work in progress limit of 0. And every board should have at least 20 columns. And if you do enterprise flow, you're required to have a boardroom, specifically targeted at putting up your boards on the wall. So in the company we work for, it's called the Blue Room. I don't know why, but it's called the Blue Room. I have no reason. but you have to have that if you do enterprise flow, right? Otherwise, you lose your certification. So boards, yes, Jira is required, because in that case, Atlassian can send us a lot of money, which is a good thing. And on your boards, you will use epic stories and tasks randomly, right? Nobody knows the difference anyway. So let's just put them up there. Different colors, doesn't really matter, doesn't add value anyway. So, and then the next thing is you should have a chart showing your progress, right? Everybody wants to have either a burn down or a burn up chart. In our case, most projects just burn money, so we'll just call it a burn chart, right? I'll give you an example of a typical burn chart. It's this one. So this is from, let's say, from January 22 to February 18. This is an actual chart, by the way. So basically, they started the cumulative story points resolve. So they didn't resolve anything until the end of the sprint, because they use sprints. They had resolved some work, right? At the same time, if you look at the purple line, it says story points remaining. So they started off with like, I don't know what, 30, and they ended the sprint with 75. So although people do a lot of work during the sprint, because they actually finished a lot of work, more work came actually in. So what happened is they didn't finish the sprint. So this is what we call a burn chart. It burns money whilst having no progress at all. And the next thing is we have to talk about communication. Of course, we want our people to communicate as less as possible, right? Communication, people lose flow, you lose money, so you don't communicate. Basically, every resource in our teams is required to have a noise-canceling headphone. That means even though they're sitting across from me, if I say something to them, if they ask them to them, they will not respond. Typically, that is what's happening. Half of my team is like that. So we experimented in Flow 2.0 to make it even worse, to introduce virtual reality, but the problem was people couldn't read their code on the screens anymore, so no progress was made anyway. So we had to figure out a different solution, and that is where Slack comes in handy, right? Slack is mandatory in Teams too if you use Flow, basically because it allows people to communicate written instead of verbally, right? And that makes communication a lot worse. So every now and then people are allowed to do pair slacking. That means they can actually talk to somebody else whilst on Slack. What we also try to do is, and it works really, really well, is that we connected Slack to Jenkins and to Git. So that means basically with every check-in you have in your repositories, the whole Slack conversation goes with it, so you can see how the developers communicate it anyway, right? And then the next thing to have is, of course,
a manifesto.
Right.
Yeah, I think you agree, right? So manifestos, I looked into what the original idea behind the manifesto is. And the manifesto is actually a published verbal declaration of the intentions, motives, and views of the issuer. So there were a lot of historic manifestos which held great ideas. People who had actually thoughts about how we should live differently together as a society. And at some point, someone...
you mean like Karl Marx?
Yeah, something like that. Just a simple example. But at some point, some guy in tech thought okay, I can actually do this for IT, right? So the first manifesto, does anyone have any clue what's the first technical manifesto is? Well, I think I have scoop. That's the GNU project, the GNU, yeah. It's about open source software. And if you read it, I actually did, looking into the history of manifesto, it's actually quite nice. Because it says we should actually treat software development differently. We shouldn't commercialize it, we should learn from each other, because there's more software to be developed than the community can actually cope with. And we've proven this, right? So they said we should have only open source software where we're making money from advertising. Because if we learn from each other, if we help each other to develop open source software, then actually we can maybe cope with all these social challenges we have in front of us, which is a nice idea, right? So that was the first manifesto in technical companies. And then came the Hacker Manifesto, which was already slightly different, but there was something about freedom. It was kind of the extension of the GNU project because software was still being commercialized and hackers were just working their way through it to just get what they didn't get from companies by themselves. And then there was a long a period of silence because you have to write a lot of pages if you want to make a manifesto. And then came the Agile Manifesto, which was actually one page, so they found a way around it, right? And after that came the Software Craftsman Manifesto, the Agile HR Manifesto. So look at the Agile Manifesto. Everybody knows this by heart, I guess, right? Interactions and individuals over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. And there's this bottom sentence, which is always ignored, right? While we value the things on the right, we also value those things on the right. We actually value the items on the left more. That's basically the concept. Then came the Software Craftsman Manifesto. And actually, just like Spotify, everybody copied this kind of structure because it was very easy to do so. So not only working software, but also well-crafted software. Not only responding to change, but also steadily adding value. Not only individuals and interactions, but also a community of professionals, which is nice. And not only customer collaboration, but also productive partnerships. And also there they say, in the pursuit of items on the left, we have found items on the right to be indispensable. This is slightly different. Then came the HR Manifesto. Well, they just said transparency over secrecy. I think they stopped valuing the things on the right? I mean, inspiration and engagement over management and retention. This became kind of a cliche. This is quite easy to tell. I think I'm going to take the inspiration before the retention perspective. That's quite easy to say, right? And then came kind of a erection, the Programming Motherfucker Manifesto.
This is my favorite, of course, as you can imagine.
And, oh yeah, you do that.
No, I'm not gonna read it, but you have to read this. This is great stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
It basically says, let us do programming, let us work on code, right? Because we're sick and tired of all the methodologies and all the things around software development. We actually have to have some time to do some coding. Well, we also want a manifesto. I thought long and hard about it. Actually, I'm going to copy the structure that was already lying in front of us. So we're going to have extensive certification over hands-on experience. We're going to copy methodologies instead of thinking for ourselves. We're going to have tool-driven confusion over building working software. We're going to have endless meetings over individual flow. And we're going to have mandatory gamification over authentic autonomy. That is, while we ignore the things on the right, we do the things on the left. Just to be clear, that's what we're doing.
Right. So, now, all there is to know about our methodology flow. That means there is one thing left, and that is certification. Because you have to make money, right? We have to make money too. So if you look at certification in IT, let's look at Scrum for a bit, right? So if you do some sort of self-defense sport, like me in judo or karate or whatever, it takes a long time before you actually become a master, right? How long does it take you to become a master in karate? Does anybody know? 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours, yeah, that's Malcolm Gladwell, right? So how many years does it take you to become a master in karate? 20 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, sort of.
So, yeah, she is, by the way. So, so 20 years. So now let's look into Scrum. How many years does it take you to become a certified Scrum Master?
2 days.
Right, you have to take a 2-day, well, it's not even mandatory, right? You can just do the exam. You have to take a 2-day course, most people do, and then you take the exam, and then you are left out there in the wild to solve all the wildest issues in projects and teams, right? And you know what happens if you do that, is they will actually treat that very dogmatic. I'll read that to you, right? So let's use my incredibly intelligent pointer. Well, I hardly ever use this. Do you use it, Simon? Yeah, you use it all the time? I don't, it's too, well, I'll use it just for Simon. So, dogma is the established belief or doctrine, like Scrum, held by a religion, so the Scrum Alliance, right? Or a particular group or organization. It's authoritative. You cannot dispute, doubt, or diverge from Scrum. It's not allowed, right? In that case, you are doing Scrum wrong. Nobody cares, but you are doing Scrum wrong, right? By the practitioners or believers, right? That means people out there in the wild, there is tons and tons of Scrum Masters, right? I saw recently on LinkedIn, I saw a profile, somebody was looking for one, and then somebody else said, I have 300 on offer. He had 300 Scrum Masters on offer, right? Like you go to a grocery store and say, oh, do me 150, 1 kilo of Scrum Masters, please, right? That is what's happening these days. But again, certification is there. Basically, well, you could say to make sure we have real professional, right? Cool thing. No, by the way, we need to make money. That's what certification is for, right? So yes, there are 2-day courses, and you take a multiple choice exam, and then you go off. And we thought, we could do better, right? We could say, oh, we need some certifications too. So you can become a certified flow resource, of course. And what you'll do during the courses, you'll learn how to rip off Post-its in the correct way, which is, of course, you rip them off entirely at once, but it's very hard. That can only be accomplished by real Post-it masters. And for the rest of you, it's from left to right instead of from bottom to top, right? You've learned that during your Scrum. So you also learn how to move items on a Jira board. Very, very important on a flow project. And what else? You learn to decorate your workplace. So we do some origami and things like that. And who needs a 2-day course? Well, you could do it in a 1-hour presentation. That means you are now all ready for a certification in flow. Oh, and by the way, we will have certification for project managers, because they were totally left out in all of the other Agile approaches. And project managers, you can make a lot of money out of them, right? So here's the certification. So I hope you're ready. Certification in flow is really, really hard. There's a multiple choice exam. It consists of 3 questions. You have to find the right answer, so please bear in mind these very difficult questions. Question 1 is, what roles do we have in flow? We either have managers, project managers, and product owners. That will make you very productive. We are all one team, lots and lots of roles, except for testers, because nobody cares about testers. And D, we only have resources. So think about the right answer for yourself while we go on to the next question. And the next question is, what is the goal of retrospectives in flow? 1, they interrupt the daily flow of our resources. Sounds good. 2, endlessly discuss why the resources in our project should work harder, as is happening in most companies, to make sure we spend 2 days preparing demos, or to watch demos fail together with our clients. Now, 3rd question, why do we have certification in flow? Well, we want well-trained resources on our projects. It makes our methodology look important, just like the other ones, they all have certification. Flow is so complicated, we can explain it in an hour, by the way. You need lots of training to become an expert, and D, we want to make money. So, these were the 3 questions. I hope you keep in mind all the answers. So, who had A, B, C, or D on any of these questions? Okay, probably all of you. So that means, by the way, you are all certified flow resources by now. Yes. So that means you can take a picture of this particular slide, fill in your name, print it, put it on the wall of your office, and you're all done. By the way, you need to pay us. Oh, sorry. Oh, we'll put it back, right? Oh, sorry. You could probably also download the slides, right? Yeah? By the way, once you're certified, once you're certified, you have to pay us 200 euros every year to stay certified, right? So that's basically how we do it. Well, that was the serious part. So we're going to do a retrospective now. And, so we have about 2 minutes to do that, right? To be in time. So, now, what we actually believe, right, is that software is built by people, right? Processes don't build software. I don't care a rat's ass about processes, basically. I don't care whether you do Scrum or XP or DSDM or Flow or maybe Rational Unified Process or Waterfall. It depends on your situation. It depends on your project. It depends on you what works best, right?
Yeah, and we believe that every organization should create and develop their own methodology because your situation is different in critical points from everybody else's situation. So one of your main responsibilities is to think about how to organize your work at your company in the best way fit for your own targets. And yeah, you have to actually come up with something by yourself. But we are all professionals and we can actually do that. I mean, you can learn from someone else. Absolutely, because there are some very interesting ideas of other people. But check the context and check to see if they are still valid in your own situation.
Sure. And then we believe that personal communication, face-to-face communication preferably, is key. Because there is no written or via video chats or whatever you have is gonna work better than sitting face to face alongside in the same office, having the freedom to do whatever you want to do in the project. Right?
Yeah, and we think personal safety rules. So if you are doing mandatory fun, for instance, are you still allowed to say, okay, I want my workspace to be very quietly or to be nice and tidy? I mean, do you think people at Zappos are allowed to do so, to say so, or are they under a lot of group pressure? So think about how to actually have autonomy in a way that works for everybody in a safe manner. Individually.
Yeah. And then, creating software is a hard job, right? It requires a lot of creativity, it requires a lot of thinking. Much more thinking and creativity than there is typing. That means you have to be able to focus. That means having meetings all day, every moment of the day, whenever people want to, is not really what you need. You need some meetings, probably, some stand-up meetings might be great, but other than that, I try to keep meetings as minimal as possible, and I like to focus on what I do.
And continuous learning is essential. Even Spotify doesn't use the Spotify model anymore. People from Spotify are talking about it because it isn't valid anymore. Agile is about ever changing to the targets you are following. So you have to, every moment you have to think, is this still the right process for us? Keep on learning, keep on evolving your own systems, because that's the way to do things.
Yeah, and the only thing to do that is if you are self-organizing to the extent that you can make most of the decisions yourself as a team, instead of some manager in some boardroom far away. Make your own decisions as much as possible. Try to get into this position that you actually can do that.
Yeah, and you have to have as many responsibilities as low in the organization as possible, because communication doesn't scale. And if you're depending on some people high in your tree to make the right decisions, they will never be able to keep up with the tempo you're obtaining, right? So make sure that teams can actually go and proceed for the targets they have with their own team, and they should not need anyone else. You don't need any large-scale process or any enterprise process. You should actually think harder on how can we actually make sure that the teams are evolving in a manner that they work together in a way that won't create new barriers.
Yeah, and at last I would say that certification is okay, right? You need it to be able to walk into the door, but other than that, I much rather work with people who have the experience and the knowledge and the drive and the passion for what they do, especially when you're talking about developers and testers and teams in IT. There's so many very much inspired people, and that's the people I much rather work with than the people who have 30 or 40 certificates at their name, right? So I like people with passion. So that's why the last point is basically always try to have as much fun as possible in anything you do, by the way. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the closing Q&A.